Welcome to Thinking with the Stars. I'm your host, Soul Cancer. Today we're going to be talking about interviews that Jeffrey Mishlove conducted while Venus and Uranus were in hard aspects. There was a couple instances. I have three different instances of this. The first one was on the 23rd of April 2016 for all the astrology geeks out there. On that time, Venus and Uranus were both in Aries in the third house. And Jeffrey Mishlove was talking. He had two discussions. One was with Stephen E. Braude, and the other one was Debra Lynne Katz. And he was talking about Ted Owens, the PK man. So Ted Owens is one of Jeffrey Mishlove's favorite subjects. I think he followed him for 10 years, wrote a book about him, and he's a fascinating example of psychokinetic powers. Another instance of Venus and Uranus being in hard aspects when Jeffrey Mishlove was conducting interviews was the 11th of September 2018. Venus was in Scorpio, and it was opposite Uranus, was in Taurus. And the discussion on this instance was with Pierre Grimes. Pierre Grimes was talking about Plato, and I guess for the astrology geeks, the most interesting thing about this was that Venus was in the 5th house at this point, and Taurus was in the 11th house. So with Scorpio and Taurus and the 5th house and the 11th house, that meant that these were fixed signs. Third instance was on the 31st of October 2018. Jeffrey was speaking with James McClenon about firewalking. And again, Uranus is one of the farther out planets, so it doesn't move signs very often. So Uranus was still in Taurus, and Venus was in Scorpio. The Placidian houses was the 3rd house and the 9th house. So where we're discussing firewalking, it's interesting to note that Aries, Aries is a fire sign, and Venus, yes, Aries is a fire sign. Let me just look that up, just to double check that. Just new at astrology, so. So what we're going to be talking about, however, is that the PK man, all of his feats of PK have to do with manipulation of water and manipulation of earth. So he predicted things like earthquakes, and there was volcanoes that he stopped. He stopped the volcanoes running, and he predicted that he could end droughts. And so all of his feats were pertaining to the earthly nature, which isn't reflected in the signs here, but it is kind of like where with the fire and the air being in the 3rd house, that they're really stoking the fires of debunking the mythology surrounding Ted Owens. And it's interesting that Jeffrey Mishlove had concluded that 2/3 of Ted Owens's premonitions or predictions actually did come true, according to Jeffrey, right? And I mean, Jeffrey's quite the thorough researcher, and Ted Owens was an opportunity for him to conduct this thorough research. But the interesting part about two-thirds, and the point of this channel is to look at interviews that Jeffrey conducts while certain hard aspects of planets are in play, and try to make a persuasive argument that astrology has, yeah, this is really embarrassing, astrology has some impact in, on the content of the interviews. And if we could prove that astrology had some impact on the content of the interviews, then it would give credence to astrology. And it would, in saying that Jeffrey and most of his guests are steeped in that scientific, skeptical, rigorous culture. So it would give even more. I mean, I did a lot of scanning of YouTube. I mean, YouTube is vast, and I know there's probably things on YouTube that I haven't discovered, but for what I have discovered, I found Jeffrey Mishlove to be one of the most credible sources for things I was interested in. Now, with the interview with Stephen E. Braude, he made a good, and I believe it's in the literature, analysis of clairvoyance, and using the terms retrocausation and active analysis. So retrocausation or active analysis, and this is what we're trying to determine. Active analysis would be, say, research and logic, and saying, okay, I'm really good at predicting the future based on my knowledge of current circumstances and projecting that forward. And the retrocausation explanation of psychokinesis is that the individual who's making the predictions is somehow able to use their powers of conscious powers, or even unconscious powers, something about them. They're able to meditate, maybe go in an altered state, and somehow cause these events to occur, and their predictions therefore to come true. So those are the two differences that we're looking at. Different explanations for phenomena that we're looking at. Is it retrocausal, or is it active analysis? And I think that's good. It really maps well into my understanding of, say, the conflict between science and religion. Active analysis is a scientific cause, and retrocausation is a more spiritual cause. So any or other insights, I mean, James McClenon is really intending to be the focus of what we're talking about today, and going back to two-thirds. So Jeffrey Mishlove had said two-thirds of Ted Owens' predictions came out to be true. Well, James McClenon, talking about the practice of firewalking, had stated that two-thirds of the participants, when he was firewalking in Sri Lanka, they were uninjured. So in terms of firewalking, I think that's the phenomenon associated with firewalking, is the capacity for people to walk on these hot coals that were raked out and not get injured. So that's impressive. And again, we can look at it in terms of was it a retrocausation factor? So what would happen is that you would take a week to prepare for your journey across the fire, and during that time you were asked to abstain from meat and eggs, and you were in a deep thought meditation, and conversing with spiritual guides that in the community. The active analysis explanation for how people in Sri Lanka were able to walk across hot coals and not get their feet burnt, well, you would say that potentially they're more used to it. They're a different breed than Westerners, us soft Westerners. They typically they go barefoot and they're used to walking on hotness throughout their lives. So, and maybe they practiced this firewalking before. And it does seem like the week of preparation leading up to it is we're looking at that combination of evenness and speed when we're walking across hot coals. So we don't want to be running on the balls of our feet, because that's going to increase the exposure of those certain parts of our foot that we need to run. But of course, we want to be swiftly getting across the coals. We don't want to dawdle, but at the same time, we want to keep our exposure to the fire even. So with that, excuse me, the thing that we're, so this all relates back to Pierre Grimes, and the way Pierre Grimes was talking about the Philosopher King and the dialectic. So when Pierre Grimes is talking about geometry, and I'm not going to cover, I don't think I'm not going to cover all of Pierre Grimes' talk on the Philosopher King, because there's no way I could do it justice. Please just go and back and watch that. I had watched it before I even started doing this series, and I thought, yeah, wow, that's cool. And now I've taken the opportunity to really break it down and learn what he's talking about, discussing Plato's Republic, and how we take someone from how we can build a Philosopher King. And they say, how do you take someone from Hades to heaven? And so in his discussion of geometry, Socrates' discussion of geometry is the idea of symmetry. And so active analysis and retrocausation are symmetrical in terms of our hypothesis, and our hypothesis might be talking about James McClenon, that shamanic ritual like firewalking is essential, and life is almost like participating in this shamanic ritual of firewalking. It's something similar. And then the reason why is because it's a matter of life or death. So if we get caught up on these hot coals and we fall onto our knees, we can succumb to the fire and we could die. So the process of living life and being awake in our lives is to know that our experiences are meaningful, in the sense that we can win or lose, and that makes a difference. We can be successful, or we can be a failure, and that's going to make a difference. And so this is how we're able to live our lives, and it's almost like putting aside the retrocausal explanations, or the active analysis explanations, and just doing our best, right? So putting through our best effort and learning from our experiences. Now, the reason why I would assume that is because Jay McClenon had mentioned something that, or had made a comment that Barry Taff had made a comment about earlier in one of my videos earlier, and I'll link to that video at the end. but what the description was saying that in general, people don't really care. So this is a tough statement, and I think most of us will agree that it's true unless it affects our job, unless it affects our family, unless it affects our daily life. People don't really care, and I think that's fair to say. But the problem with caring is that we need to really understand why. Right, they give different solutions. So James McClennon's solution is to belief in a higher power, and Barry Taft's solution, which we spoke about previously, was to have a positive feedback loop. And when discussing personal identity, I think the idea of a positive feedback loop is pretty close to having a false belief system. It's dangerously close to having a false belief system is one of these feedback loops. Because if I'm thinking, oh yes, I'm really thinking always. I always think the right things. I'm always on the ball with my behaviors. I'm always on the ball with my judgment. How do I know? How am I able to verify this? Like, is it because everything always goes right for me, or is it because I'm just lucky that way, or is it because of my hard work and my effort? Well, what if I concentrate my effort in another direction? Maybe that would be superior. So I think the positive feedback loop is kind of what cuts between retrocausal and active analysis. And I mean, belief in a higher power, yeah, potentially that's going to help us, but I might not have awareness of, consciously, I might not have awareness of what this higher power actually is. So I would think this is where Pierre Grimes now talking about it wasn't geometry where we learned about symmetry. It was astrology, not astrology. It was astronomy, where we learned about symmetry and breaking our argument down, breaking our hypothesis down into equal portions as part of the dialectic. But as the final part of the dialectic, where we're talking about music, we're looking at a higher form of analogy, and I think the higher form of analogy that we're coming to is, in terms of this positive feedback loop, would be thinking about our conscious experiences and saying, okay, so I'm consciously experiencing a feedback loop, but then there's information missing. So my idea of having a conscious experience is only because of my ignorance. So if we took all the information in the universe and then subtracted all the information in the universe, then there wouldn't be any such thing as a conscious experience. And the thing about having a conscious experience is that we're gaining extra information, but it's always at the expense of that information or other information. So if I'm gaining information, somebody else is losing information. And this is just the state of affairs. So this is how a positive feedback loop is similar to a shamanic ritual, such as firewalking. And the only way I know if I firewalked correctly is if I'm one of the 2/3 who didn't get seriously burned on my feet. So I think that's all I'm going to say about these three instances of Uranus and Venus being in either conjunct or opposite, and Jeffrey Mishlev conducting interviews on those instances. And I hope we get something out of it, and thanks very much. And I'll be back in another little while with another segment where I'm going to be talking about the nodes, the North Node and the South Node, and their aspects with Venus, and whether I can draw any conclusions that demonstrate to us that these aspects are in fact influencing our behaviors, our discussions, whether in macro scale or in the minutia of the conversation. So looking forward to that, and thanks very much. Hope you have a good day.